Hello, everyone. Tonight, we are deep in a place where the ground groans under glaciers, where each gust of wind bites like teeth and something ancient prowls just out of reach of the firelight. You're standing ankle-deep in snow that hasn't melted in 12,000 years, and behind you know, don't turn around, something just crunched. It's not twigs, it's bone. You probably won't survive. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always like to know who else is awake at this hour. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. You shuffle along the icy ridge, breath fogging in front of you like the ghost of some other life. There's no moon, just a dull smear of stars, and the whisper of things long buried. Below the slope opens into a basin choked with fog and ancient pine trunks, their twisted roots clutching at secrets. That's when you see it, two ivory arcs poking from the snow like tusks from a shallow grave. Except they're not tusks, they're fangs. Saber teeth. You crouch beside the protrusions, brushing away the powdery frost with fingers that barely feel anymore. One curve is hole polished by time. The other cracked, chipped at the end, like a bite never finished. This thing was buried here long before your country existed, before humans even spoke in full sentences. The skull that follows is wide cat-like but not modern. Not familiar. The eye sockets are massive and hollow. The jaw is thick, built to open wide, almost absurdly so. You imagine it yawned in slow motion, revealing those enormous curved canines. You can't help but mutter, how did this thing walk with teeth like that? According to paleontologists, Smilodon fatalis, the most famous saber-toothed cat, could grow fangs up to 7 inches long. That's basically a steak knife jutting from each side of its mouth, which, let's be honest, makes your dentist's job look like origami. Unlike lions or tigers today, Smilodons had incredibly powerful forelimbs built to wrestle prey to the ground before delivering a precise stab through the neck or belly. They didn't chase, they didn't maul, they finished. And you're sitting right where one of them probably did just that. The wind shifts, carrying a strange scent. Not rot, not pine. Something like iron and snow mixed together. You get the sudden feeling you're being watched not by a predator but by history. By the weight of extinction. It's not just the teeth, it's what they meant. The saber shape evolved multiple times in nature, a classic case of convergent evolution. Something about those long, slender fangs kept reappearing in creatures that had no direct connection. It was like evolution was obsessed with the same terrible idea. But here's the twist. Those fangs were fragile. The thickness was an illusion. Structurally, saber teeth were surprisingly brittle. One good misbite, one missed. Strike against a flailing mammoth leg and snap. Game over. There are specimens in museums with fangs sheared off like broken chopsticks. And that's not even the weirdest part. Historians still debate whether the saber teeth were even meant for hunting at all. Some theories suggest they were ornamental, like a peacock's tail or a stag's antlers. Flashy, dangerous, but mostly for show. Imagine risking your life just to impress your next mate. Oh wait, that's still a thing. The snow deepens as you push further into the basin. You find another skull, smaller, maybe a juvenile. Its fangs are barely nubs. You get the sudden image of a saber-toothed kitten, all fluff and doom. Nature really doesn't hold back, does it? Your thoughts drift to human parallels. Our ancestors lived alongside these beasts. In fact, there's rock art that shows feline shapes with long, downward-pointing fangs. Picture a huddled group of early Homo sapiens carving out shelter in the shadows of creatures twice their size with dental accessories that would make a vampire blush. And then one day the saber-toothed cats were gone, vanished. Some blame the climate, others the humans. Some say both. The Ice Age shifted gears. The big prey disappeared, and with it, the cats who depended on them. If you can't stab a bison because there's no bison left to stab, well, you don't stab anything. you starve. The first saber-toothed fossil was discovered in the early 19th century. At first, scientists couldn't believe it was real. They thought someone had glued walrus tusks to a jaguar skull. And honestly, can you blame them? It sounds like the setup to a prank. Hey, what if a cat had tusks like a swordfish? And then nature just said, hold my glacier. You sit back, eyes on the frost-crusted teeth, and feel the timeline pressing in around you. Somewhere far beneath your feet are more. Dozens, hundreds of saber-toothed beasts that once ruled this frozen place. And maybe, just maybe, some of them died not because of hunger or violence, but because their precious, deadly fangs failed them at the worst possible time. You breathe out slowly. Snow swirls in patterns too perfect to last. Remember when humans evolved and started naming things? We called this one Smilodon, from the Greek smile and tooth. Not because it smiled, trust me it didn't, but because from a distance those curved canines made it look like it did. And isn't that the most Ice Age thing you've ever heard? You press on through the slush and frost the air, somehow thinner than before, as if the very cold is sipping your breath before you get the chance. The teeth are still on your mind. Specifically, those teeth, the kind that belong more in a fantasy novel than in a mammal's skull. They shouldn't exist, and yet, here you are watching nature's most impractical masterpiece poking up from under tree roots like ghostly tusks. You reach a clearing where someone human most likely built a crude wooden sign long ago. It's half fallen but still legible under a thin skin of ice. It reads, Saber-toothed Tiger Exhibit. 1894. There's no building anymore. Just a lonely bench and an information plaque now half-eaten by lichen. You sit anyway, as if instinctively compelled to absorb the story of the tooth. The plaque, scratched and fading, tells of Smilodon fatalis, yes, the same species you saw earlier, and how its teeth weren't just big. They were ridiculously big. Anatomically, each canine could grow over 17 centimeters long. That's 2/3 the length of a standard kitchen knife, jutting from a jaw that somehow managed to close without snapping like a twig. But there's a catch, those teeth weren't for gnawing. See, unlike modern cats who crush bone with brute force, Smilodon couldn't afford the same recklessness. Its bite force was surprisingly weak. In fact, pound for pound, it probably had a gentler bite than your house cat. Instead, it relied on precision. Think more assassin than brawler. You're looking at a predator that evolved not to chase but to ambush, not to chew but to execute. The tooth then becomes more than a weapon. It's a promise of perfection. A mistake means a crack. A crack means infection. Infection, death. No pressure, of course. Some paleontologists think Smilodon's upper canines were built like curved scalpels, ideal for slicing through the soft tissues of prey like jugulars and windpipes. But there's a debate, oh yes, and it's a loud one. Historians still argue whether these teeth were primarily offensive or ceremonial. One camp insists on the kill-strike function, citing the sharpened edges and downward curvature. Another suggests sexual selection, oversized canines, as a kind of prehistoric flex, a look how dangerous I could be display, sort of like owning a motorcycle you never ride, except bloodier. You lean back trying to imagine a world where having massive teeth could both save your life and end it. That's the paradox of the saber. Its very existence is an evolutionary gamble. Oddly enough, you remember reading once that some deer species like the Chinese water deer also grow long, fang-like canines. Not for hunting, but for combat. They clash in antlerless duels where saber-style teeth do the talking. That's evolution for you. Sometimes it recycles the same weird idea in completely different animals just because it works, or looks cool. There's something almost pitiful about the skull nearby. It's weathered, yes, but elegant. The fangs, now yellowed, still hold an air of menace. You wonder what that cat's last moment was like. A misjudged leap, a fight for dominance, a botched ambush where a bison hoof met fragile bone. Nature's not sentimental, but even she has a flair for the dramatic. Then something catches your eye. On the backside of the skull, right along the upper jawline, there's a subtle groove, a worn channel along the base of the tooth socket. You remember reading about the saber sheath? It's not armor per se, but the shape of the lower jaw may have evolved to cradle and protect those delicate upper canines when the mouth closed. Even nature had to design a workaround for her own showpiece. And yet, despite all that protection, fossils show many saber-toothed cats died with fractured fangs, broken tips, split roots. It's as if these animals were built with luxury weapons but lived in a world that only respected blunt force. That might explain why these beasts are extinct and why lions still reign. You rise from the bench and walk to a nearby hollow, your boots crunching on ancient gravel. There, half buried in the soil, lies a slab of rock embedded with a full saber-toothed jaw. Perfect. Complete. Someone even set a rusted iron frame around it, as if the land itself were trying to curate its own museum. And what a museum piece it is. The teeth arch like scimitars. The bone still cradles them like jealous fingers. You lean in close and imagine the cat's final breath, and what it took to keep those weapons intact until that very moment. Every second alive with those sabers was a tightrope act. You wonder too about how these teeth looked fresh. Pearly white streaked with blood, covered in meat one moment and gleaming clean the next after a dip in an Ice Age river. Maybe they were never truly clean. Maybe they never needed to be. Life then wasn't about hygiene. It was about getting through one more night with your fangs intact. The sun has dipped behind the hills now and the temperature drops fast. You wrap your coat tighter, but it doesn't help much. The cold here isn't just weather, it's legacy. It gnaws at you like the memory of something once powerful and sharp, now dulled by centuries of burial. As you turn to leave, you hear a creak behind you. Not a branch, not the wind, something else. You glance back and for a moment, a single breath you swear the jawbone in the rock has shifted. Just a trick of the light. Or maybe some teeth don't rest easy. The next morning, if you can even call it, that gray light just seeps into the sky like lukewarm tea. You find yourself backtracking along the ridge. The snow has melted slightly overnight and refrozen into slick, sharp crust. Every step crunches, and every crunch feels like it might wake something beneath. And yet, you continue, eyes locked on the horizon, mind stuck on the same repeating image, those ridiculous teeth. It's not just their size that bothers you. It's the shape, the design. Those fangs were absurdly long, yet so narrow, curving down like ivory sabers forged in a fever dream. You can't stop wondering, how did those teeth even fit in a mouth? You reach a patch of exposed steel where the wind has scoured the snow down to bare earth. Something glints near a drift. Another fossil fragment, this time a partial jawbone smaller than the last. No saber teeth, just molars and a few thick incisors. It's a reminder Smilodon didn't just have fangs. It had a whole mouth, and that mouth had a problem. See, if you have 7-inch teeth up top, you can't exactly close your mouth the way other cats do. You need an overbite on steroids. And the jaws of Smilodon show exactly that, an adaptation where the lower jaw could drop at extreme angles wide enough to accommodate the downward arc of the sabers. Some estimates suggest a gape of nearly 120 degrees. That's more than a snake. Try yawning that wide without unhinging your dignity. But even with that grotesque flexibility, Smilodon's bite wasn't strong. In fact, pound for pound, its bite force was weaker than a lion's. It wasn't designed to crush bones or wrestle prey into submission with sheer jaw power. That's where those overdeveloped forelimbs came in. Smilodon tackled prey with strength and weight first, then brought the teeth into play, like setting the stage before the final act. You duck under a fallen branch and feel the wind shift again, colder now, as if the Ice Age is exhaling. The predators back then had no choice but to evolve strange weapons. Megafauna, like mastodons, giant sloths, and bison weren't pushovers. So saber-toothed cats got creative. Not faster, not stronger, just more efficiently brutal. But here's where it gets odd. The sabers themselves weren't particularly durable. Cross-sections show that they were hollow at the base, not solid all the way through. It's like carrying glass daggers into a bar fight. One good whack against a rib or femur and snap, your evolutionary advantage just turned into a death sentence. And guess what? That happened. A lot. Fossils show signs of snapped canines healed or partially worn down. You wonder how often these cats had to make the decision. Do I risk using my fangs, or do I just hold them back and hope I don't die of hunger later? Evolution didn't offer refunds. Historians still debate whether the saber teeth were for killing prey or simply threatening rivals. Some argue they were like antlers on a deer used in ritual displays and dominance contests. Others think they were reserved only for the final blow, used delicately, almost surgically. One swipe, one stab, and back to safety. You can't help but imagine a saber-toothed cat practicing restraint, waiting, judging angles, avoiding bones. It seems so patient, so unlike the messy, impulsive brutality people usually imagine. You step over a patch of frozen moss and nearly slip. Caught yourself, barely. That's when you notice something strange, a gouge in the earth, shallow, long, almost like a trench. You kneel, brushing snow away, until your fingers touch something hard and white. A tooth, just one, long curved, fossilized to a dull yellow. It's cracked along one edge and part of the tip is missing. You turn it over and see faint striations like the ridges of a knife blade. Not a clean break, it looks worn. Like it wasn't lost in a fight but used over and over until it gave out. That's the thing, no one talks about wear and tear. Even in a world of ice and muscle and violence, biology still follows the rules. Teeth erode, cracks speed, and old saber-toothed cats likely knew it. Picture it, a veteran Smilodon walking with a limp, one saber dulled from years of use. It can still hunt maybe, but it's slower now, more careful. It doesn't risk the big prey anymore. Maybe it steals, maybe it scavenges, maybe its final hunt ends not with a glorious kill, but a snapped fang and a slow collapse under the cold sky. And yet it survived longer than it should have. Why? Some scientists suggest Smilodon may have had social behavior. Fossils found together in the La Brea tar pits show multiple individuals, sometimes injured, sometimes old, surviving long past the point they should have been able to on their own. It raises a question. Did saber-toothed cats take care of each other? Now, that's wild. You never thought of them as pack animals. The modern big cats that hunt in groups like lions are exceptions, not the rule. Most felines are solitary, but if Smilodon cared for its wounded even just occasionally, that changes everything. A broken tooth wouldn't be a death sentence. Not right away. You glance back at the single tooth in your hand and think maybe this was from one of those survivors. A cat that adapted not through muscle or tooth, but by leaning just a little on the tribe. The wind howls again like it's calling for something that can no longer answer. You pocket the fang, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Remember when we said these teeth were both blessings and curses? That hasn't changed. Not even for you. The path narrows into a canyon of frost and stone, and you're walking single file with your own thoughts now. The wind here isn't loud. It's worse, silent. Pressed between the icy cliffs, it doesn't howl. It waits. And under that waiting quiet, your boots carry you toward something fossilized but not dead. You find yourself staring at a massive mural carved into the rock face. Not ancient, not modern, somewhere in between. A recreation probably by an eccentric scientist or an underfunded park ranger with too much time and access to chisels. It depicts a Smilodon lunging, mouth wide open in mid-roar, fangs exaggerated to almost comedic proportions. But it's the detail that stops you. One tooth is cracked clean through. Intentionally drawn that way. Someone knew. Someone wanted you to notice. You remember the phrase from a lecture you barely paid attention to, teeth that grew with trouble. That's what the expert had called them. Sabers were never simple weapons. They were liabilities that required micromanagement from birth. The saber teeth didn't grow in all at once. No sudden eruption of death blades in puberty. They emerged slowly over months as the juvenile Smilodon matured. And during that time, the animal had to protect them at all costs. One clumsy pounce, one hard chew on a bone, and it was over before it began. Imagine being a teenager with 7-inch knives slowly protruding from your mouth, knowing if they break too early, you'll starve before you can ever hunt. That's not evolution. That's a high-stakes dental horror show. And the real kicker, the sabers didn't fully lock in until long after the cat reached adult size. So for a time, these beasts were walking contradictions, big bodies, baby weapons. That would have made them vulnerable, hesitant, even awkward. Nature's deadliest cats spent part of their lives as anxious messes dodging risks like a kid wearing braces made of bone. You run your fingers along the carving and notice something strange, a line of shallow etchings at the base of the broken fang. At first you think it's just weathering. Then you realize no, they're not cracks. They're deliberate. Tally marks. 1, 2, 3, 27. You pause. Someone was counting. How many saber-toothed cats broke their teeth? How many died because of it? Back in the real fossil record, scientists have discovered something fascinating. Smilodon fossils frequently show healed injuries, broken limbs, fractured ribs, even smashed hips that somehow mended. But cracked teeth, that was often fatal. Unlike bones, canines don't heal. If the root was exposed, infection followed. If infection spread, death wasn't far behind. Historians still debate whether saber-toothed cats understood this risk instinctively. Did they hold back during fights? Did they learn to target soft tissue with eerie precision? Or was every hunt a coin toss between glory and a shattered jaw? You sit on a rock ledge and remember something even weirder. You once read about how elephant tusks, despite being solid ivory, also suffer from stress fractures. And sometimes elephants seem to favor one tusk over the other, like it's their dominant hand. Could saber-toothed cats have done the same? Maybe they had a favorite fang. Imagine a Smilodon with a limp and a chipped right tooth always aiming left. Always cautious on one side. Nature adapting in real time. That thought makes you smile. Not because it's funny, but because it's human. We do that too, favor one knee chew on one side. Tilt our heads just slightly. Maybe the monsters of the Pleistocene weren't as monstrous as we thought. Maybe they just had dental preferences. You stretch your legs and glance up at the mural again. The light has shifted, and now the etched tally marks look like scars. Hundreds of years old, or maybe just a month. Hard to say. Ice preserves everything, including secrets. You follow a new path now winding down into a sunken meadow choked with fog. It smells like frozen flowers and distant rot. Your fingers touch something in your coat pocket, the cracked fang you took earlier. It still has weight, still feels like a promise, and just ahead poking out of the mist is another find. A skeleton half exposed in the frozen ground, ribs curled like the fingers of a sleeping giant. You approach carefully, half expecting it to rise. It doesn't, but it does speak. Not with words, bones never do, but with arrangement. The jaw is dislocated. One tooth is missing, not broken, just gone. You crouch, brushing dirt away from the socket. It's clean, smooth, healed. No sign of trauma. No infection scarring. This cat lost its saber and lived. That's not just unusual, that's historic. You blink. Maybe the tooth fell out with age, a saying. Maybe it was shed like a deer's antler, although no evidence exists for that. Or maybe something else happened. A slow decay, a hidden fracture, a self-extraction. There's no proof, no data. Only this one cat, this one whisper. And yet it opens a door. What if in old age saber teeth did loosen? What if the root system weakened over decades and these apex predators aging? Arthritic slower simply dropped their weapons like warriors laying down swords. No one knows, no one can. But you're here and you're looking at the empty socket and you feel something that can't be cataloged mercy. Maybe nature gives a quiet grace to her killers at the end. No fangs, no fight, just snow and silence. You step away from the skeleton not bothering to cover it. The earth already does that one snowflake at a time. And somewhere behind you in the deep silence of a world too old to care a single cracked fang waits for another story to be told. You don't sleep that night, not properly. The wind scratches at the corners of your shelter like it wants in not with rage, but curiosity. And beneath that endless moaning, your dreams are full of bone sockets and teeth that fall out like loose nails. By morning, your mouth aches in sympathy, as if your own molars are conspiring to empathize. You hike out early, tracing the edge of a half-frozen creek. The water still flows, barely carving thin veins through the glacial crust. And then you see it, a break in the bank where the mud sloughs off into something pale and clean and unmistakably curved. You freeze. It's another skull. You crouch, hands trembling with that mix of excitement and respectful dread, and begin to clear the surrounding frost. The skull is intact, beautiful in a grim sort of way. Wide zygomatic arches, strong nasal ridge, thick jawbone, and no saber teeth. None. The sockets are there, gaping, empty, smooth around the edges, as if the teeth once sat proudly in their ivory thrones and then left. Not shattered, not wrenched out, just gone. The left socket has the faintest ridge like scar tissue. The right a depression too shallow to be fresh, too defined to be a post-mortem break. You can't explain it, but you know what you're looking at. This cat lived long enough to lose its sabers. That's not something in the textbooks. In fact, you recall the exact opposite. Paleontologists often argue that if a saber-toothed cat lost a fang, it was usually due to injury or death. But this looks voluntary, or at least inevitable. The question now claws at your brain like a cold hand. Did saber-toothed beasts lose their teeth in old age? It sounds absurd at first. These were not sharks endlessly regenerating rows of weaponry. Mammals don't shed permanent teeth casually. And yet, elephants lose molars. Walruses wear down their tusks. Rodents' incisors never stop growing. They wear them down constantly or die trying. So maybe, just maybe, Smilodon had a back-end adaptation. Not to grow sabers again, but to retreat from them when survival required stealth over spectacle. Historians still debate whether dental regression like this was possible. The fossil record isn't kind enough to give us clear timelines of dental health in individual specimens. You can't put a skull through a time-lapse reel. All you get is the end result, and in this case, the end result is a ghost of a fang. You trace a finger along the jaw, imagining this predator in its last winter. No sabers, no glory, just thick claws, old bones, and eyes that still knew the ice better than any map. Did it hide more, scavenge? More? Maybe it lingered near humans, picking at scraps. That's a theory you've read before, that Smilodon sometimes followed hominid bands, shadowing them like stray dogs. Not for friendship, for leftovers. The air shifts, and with it your perspective. You start to wonder what the cat thought. If it thought, did it notice the absence? Did it feel relief or loss? Did it dream in whatever dreams cats had of the weight once held in its jaw? You spot a trail leading uphill where the rocks glitter with a strange mineral sheen. At the top is a plateau littered with bones, not arranged, not museum clean, just scattered, as if something died or many somethings and no one ever bothered to tidy up. You pick through the remains, careful not to disturb too much. One ribcage half crushed, one pelvis fractured and healed, one jawbone with a single saber still embedded. Just one. The other socket is empty, and this time the remaining tooth is short, worn. The tip is ground flat as if used again and again on flesh hide or maybe even bone. You hold your breath. Hold. This was a transitional skull. Not fully fanged, not fully toothless, somewhere in between. And suddenly, you get it. These cats didn't lose their teeth overnight. It was gradual, attritional, a battle not with prey but with time. One tooth would crack first, then the other would dull. Maybe infection weakened the root. Maybe age dried the jawbone until it couldn't hold tight anymore. And eventually, they simply dropped out. You whisper, so they did lose them and the wind agrees, or maybe it just stirs the branches in a way that sounds like agreement. What happened next? That's the next mystery. Without their signature weapons, were these cats doomed? Did they die soon after? Or did they adapt using claws, cunning, or companionship? You remember the La Brea fossils again. So many skeletons show injuries healed long after the event. Limps, broken backs, even toothless jaws. And yet they lived. That only happens with help. So perhaps in their twilight, these beasts leaned on others, shared kills, slept in circles. Survived not as solitary monsters, but as old warriors in a quiet alliance. And in that sense, maybe losing their teeth wasn't failure. It was a passage, a shift from predator to elder. You sit for a while on the rocks watching the sun smear gold across the glacier lines. And you wonder, not for the first time, whether we give these creatures too little credit. We see the fangs and forget the rest. But perhaps those fangs were never the whole story. Maybe the real legend begins when the teeth fall out. By now, you've stopped expecting the landscape to make sense. The Ice Age doesn't offer clean lines or tidy lessons. It gives you teeth in the snow and bones in the mud. And today it gives you tracks. Not fresh, but fresher than they should be. You're walking along a low ridge when you see them, deep indentations in the frozen soil, spaced evenly like careful footfalls from something heavy and deliberate. Each paw print is wide-rounded and pressed with the faint echo of retractable claws. Not that you think it's actually fresh, probably a fossilized impression or a recreation. You follow anyway. The trail curves around a boulder and dips into a hollow. And there, cradled in the arms of a half-collapsed rock slide, is the body of a Smilodon, mummified, intact. Its skin is drawn tight over bone like old leather. The fur is faded but still golden brown. Most striking of all, its left saber is broken at the midpoint, jagged like a snapped icicle. The right fang is missing entirely. And yet, this beast didn't die in battle. Its ribs aren't shattered. There's no trauma to the skull. In fact, if anything, it looks like it just lay down and stopped. You crouch beside it and examine the mouth more closely. The right socket shows signs of long-term healing, a gentle remodel of bone over time. This wasn't a sudden break. It was slow. Age. This cat grew old. You step back, heart pounding. Everything you've been wondering, everything you've suspected, it's here. This cat lost its teeth in life, not death. And it kept going. Not for days. Years. Historians still debate whether such longevity was common or rare. Some argue these cats had short, violent lives, burning out by age 6 or 7. Others propose a quieter theory that, like modern lions, some individuals reach the double digits, surviving a full decade or more. If so, then age-related tooth loss becomes more than possible. It becomes expected. But what kind of life does a saber-toothed cat lead without sabers? You imagine this one walking slower than the rest, eating last, sleeping longer, not hunting perhaps, but scavenging or simply following. A shadow of its former self, yes, but still a presence. Oddly enough, this lines up with something you once read in a book that mostly smelled like mildew and regret. Some paleontologists believe Smilodon fatalis may have had social tendencies. Not packs exactly, but loose groups. Temporary alliances. Cooperative mothers. Paired hunting. Injured individuals surviving long enough to heal. That's not normal for a purely solitary predator. And maybe, just maybe, they made room for their elders. That makes sense. You can't grow a weapon that dangerous without also growing a culture that respects it. Otherwise, every cat's a liability. But if you grow up watching a massive male lose a saber and still command attention, still hold territory, still survive, you learn something. You learn that power isn't just fangs. It's memory, reputation, the weight of everything you've outlived. The mummified cat lies still, its skin cracked like the bark of an ancient tree. You find yourself whispering something dumb like, "You made it." Because it did. Against the odds. Against the glaciers. Against time. You take a step back and look around the hollow. There's no sign of a struggle. Just quiet, the kind that falls after the last breath. This wasn't a battlefield, it was a resting place. You wonder if the cat knew. You climb out of the hollow boots, crunching on frozen gravel. As you crest the ridge, your thoughts turn practical again. What happens when those teeth fall out? Can the cat eat? Can it defend itself? Did it become someone else's problem? Another predator's prey. And then you remember a paper you barely skimmed once. It mentioned a Smilodon skull found with both fangs missing and one healed jaw injury, but no signs of malnutrition. The cat had eaten just fine, which means maybe the teeth weren't everything. In fact, the rest of the mouth, the molars, the premolars, those were still sharp, still good for tearing and grinding. The sabers may have been the stars, but the supporting cast held the show together. You chuckle out loud. Nature's dental plan, you mutter. Lose the fangs, keep the grinders. It's not even a joke, it's survival. You pass another series of stones, this time stacked intentionally. Markers. Someone else has been here. Maybe a century ago, maybe a week. And as you pass, you notice something tucked between two rocks, a tiny saber replica. Not metal, not plastic, carved bone. Someone left it as tribute. That says more than any textbook. Because deep down we know. We recognize what it means to carry something precious and dangerous for most of our lives, only to lose it and still wake up the next morning. That's not failure, that's age. That's strength in its final form. The sun is lower now, casting everything in long gold shadows. You sit for a moment on the ridge and look out at the expanse of Ice Age, nothing trying to imagine how many saber-toothed cats once roamed here. Dozens, hundreds. You wonder how many lost their teeth, how many walked a little slower after, how many weren't remembered because they didn't die in some cinematic battle but simply grew old and lay down in the snow one last time. And how many even now lie waiting beneath the frost, toothless, but not forgotten. The cold hits differently now. Not sharper, but deeper, as if it's soaking into your bones the way time soaks into the landscape. You descend into a lower ravine, one you almost didn't notice, hidden by drooping pine limbs and the weight of centuries. Down here, the ground changes. It's not frozen solid like the ridge above. It's soft, treacherous, and it stinks. You know where you are before you see it. The La Brea tar pits, or rather a cousin of them. A smaller site, lesser known but no less gruesome in its ability to trap, digest, and preserve. From a distance, it looks like nothing more than a black glassy pond. Up close, it's a slow, sticky death. And somehow that death preserved life in the most morbidly meticulous way imaginable. And the bones. Oh, the bones are everywhere. They lie exposed in tangled clusters like driftwood, caught in a tide that never receded. Mostly ungulates, bison, horses, camels. But mixed among them are predators. Lots of predators. Far too many for any healthy ecosystem. That's the thing about tar, it lures the hunters too. And herbivore gets stuck. It bellows, cries out, and that cry becomes bait. A saber-toothed cat approaches, lunges, sinks. Then another, and another. The death trap doesn't discriminate. It collects. You kneel beside a cluster of bones half submerged in tar. Among them, unmistakable, is a Smilodon skull. This one's different. The upper canines are both broken. Clean, symmetrical snaps as if the cat drove them straight into something unyielding and didn't have time to regret it. You lean closer, fighting the sour fumes, and spot stress fractures along the tooth bases. Not fresh. These were already compromised before the end. Historians still debate whether these sabers broke during the kill or in panic afterward. Some believe the cats would dig their fangs in and then get yanked violently as the prey struggled. Others argue the tar itself was the culprit, its grip causing the predator to twist unnaturally, snapping their greatest weapons in a single final mistake. And here's the kicker. Most of the Smilodon fossils pulled from tar pits show signs of dental damage. That's not coincidence. It's a pattern, which means the very thing that defined them, those giant, glorious bone-white sabers, may have been the reason so many died here. You imagine the scene: a trapped bison, screaming flanks heaving, eyes wide. A Smilodon circling, muscles rippling, teeth bared. The pounce, the strike, and then realization. The ground sucks at its legs. The kill is too easy, the cost too high. The fangs catch. The prey thrashes. Crack. And then silence. But not the peaceful kind. You move on to another body. This one half lifted from the tar by erosion. You could see the ribs in the upper jaw, and one fang. Just one is still intact. Long, elegant, untouched by rot. You reach out just to trace the line of it, and as your fingers hover, you feel the strangest thing: warmth. Not actual heat. The sun's barely out, but warmth in the metaphorical sense. Reverence. As if the saber itself is trying to tell you a story. This fang didn't break, it endured. And suddenly, you realize what this place really is. It's not a death trap. It's a museum curated by nature, showcasing the price of power. All around you are variations on the same theme. Fanged glory snapped too soon. Old cats, young cats, broken ones, pristine ones. The tar didn't care. It claimed them all. And yet, despite that, here you are surrounded by proof that these animals kept trying. They didn't evolve smaller teeth to avoid the risk. They doubled down. Generation after generation, sabers stayed long. Fragile, beautiful. That's not stupidity, that's commitment. Because even if they died young, even if the fangs broke, they worked. They allowed these cats to bring down prey twice their size. To compete with dire wolves, short-faced bears, giant scavenging vultures. And for a time, a long time, they ruled. Until they didn't. The tar teaches another lesson too. These weren't solitary beasts swept away one by one. No. Many Smilodon skeletons here show groupings. Multiple cats entangled in the same pit, dying within hours of each other. Maybe it was coincidence, or maybe it was something more. Some researchers argue that these groupings suggest social behavior, that the cats returned to help each other, to pull a sibling from the muck, to protect a mate, to scavenge a shared kill. And that's when they died too. You can't help but admire that in a sad way. A cat that could have walked away but didn't. You sit by the edge of the pit as the wind swirls thick with history and asphalt breath. Around you, the landscape murmurs. Not loudly, not urgently, just persistently, like the sound of footsteps in shallow mud. You wonder how many more bones are still down there. Teeth intact, teeth broken, teeth waiting. The sun dips behind a hill and shadows stretch long across the tar. You feel a chill crawl up your spine, not from the cold, but from the weight of it all. The choices, the accidents, the legends caught mid-fall. And just before you turn to leave, you see a fresh ripple on the tar's surface. Probably just a bubble. Probably. You climb out of the tar basin slowly, your boots making a sickening pop with each step. Whatever this place preserves, it doesn't let go easily. You wipe your hands on your coat, pointless really, and follow a narrow deer path into the woods. It winds uphill toward higher, rockier ground. Less stick, more stone. And stone, unlike tar, has no opinions. It just waits. But you're thinking about those teeth again. Not the ones you've seen snapped and rotting, but the ones still whole. The ones that never bit anything. Because here's the secret, no one really wants to admit those fangs weren't always for biting. You find a boulder shaped like a fossilized loaf of bread and take a seat, letting your legs dangle over the edge. Below you lies a narrow valley shrouded in mist. You squint, half expecting to see another skeleton sprawled somewhere below. Instead, you see nothing but scrub and silence. Still, your mind replays a theory you once stumbled across during a midnight Wikipedia spiral that saber-teeth, for all their deadliness, might not have been primarily functional. Not for hunting, not for killing, not for meat, but for show. That's right, a prehistoric flex, like a peacock's tail or a stag's antlers giant. Impractical, expensive body parts evolved less for utility and more for intimidation. And let's be honest, probably to impress potential mates. Nature doesn't care about efficiency when ego's involved. You chuckle, imagining two smilodons staring each other down, both puffed up and snarling sabers gleaming in the sun, not attacking, just posing, like teenagers at a gym flexing in the mirror. Bro, check the curve on this one. Nah, man, mine's got more polish. Historians still debate whether Smilodon used its sabers for combat or courtship. Some fossil evidence shows puncture wounds in other cats' skulls, definitely combat. But other finds reveal cats with worn-down, uneven sabers that clearly weren't being used for killing, at least not efficiently. So, what were they doing with them? Maybe nothing. Maybe just being seen was enough. You think of modern animals with ridiculous features. The frilled-neck lizard, the moose, the narwhal. All of them evolved body parts that shout, "Don't mess with me," without ever needing to strike. Intimidation is evolution's lazy genius. Why fight if you can just look terrifying? There's a phrase that comes to mind from a documentary voiceover, possibly whispered by David Attenborough himself. Weapons unused can still win battles. You like that? You shift your gaze to a broken tree stump nearby. At first glance, it's nothing special. Then you notice the groove's thin, shallow scrapes running parallel to each other, clean as claw marks, but too wide set. Could it be? You walk over and kneel. The bark's been worn away in a specific pattern, and your mind starts putting pieces together. A territorial marker. A dominance display. Cats today rub their scent on trees. Maybe ancient ones left visual warnings too. And what better way to do that than with teeth? You imagine a saber-toothed cat approaching the tree, standing tall, tilting its head, and dragging one curved fang slowly down the trunk, leaving a warning for any would-be rivals. This is mine. Not a roar, not a chase, just art. And in a world where roaring wasn't always the best idea, remember these forests? Echoed with dire wolves and short-faced bears, maybe silent messages were smarter. As you ponder, you find another oddity. A small depression in the soil. At first, just a dip. But as you brush the dirt aside, your fingers reveal a polished stone disc about the size of a saucer. Not natural. It's too round. You turn it over and find a faint engraving, a curved tooth stylized, flanked by what looks like claw marks. You hold it up to the light and realize someone carved this. Someone saw the saber tooth not just as a weapon, but as a symbol. Maybe an ancient human. Maybe a later tribe. Maybe someone who lived long after the cats were gone but still remembered the shape of that fang. A memory passed down until it became myth. You pocket the stone, carefully. Not like a souvenir, but like you're borrowing it. Like it still belongs to something bigger than you. And it hits you. We keep calling these animals beasts, but maybe that's wrong. Maybe they were icons. The saber itself was more than bone. It was identity, presence, warning, status. Even after death, those teeth didn't stop communicating. That's why they're in museums. That's why we dream about them. That's why you're still out here, half frozen, following their trail. Because a saber tooth that never bit anyone still mattered. Maybe more so. As the wind picks up again, whispering through the trees like ancient applause, you feel it. That strange pulse of recognition. The understanding that some weapons were never meant to draw blood. Just awe. You rise and move on, not with haste, but with the slow dignity of someone walking behind royalty. Because that's what this was in its own sharp-toothed way, a dynasty of predators so confident they didn't always need to use the very things that defined them. And you're the last one following. The wind has grown lazy as you climb again, no longer slicing but dragging across your coat like a bored ghost. Trees thin, and the ground turns rough shale and gravel the broken skin of the earth. You pause to catch your breath, and that's when you hear it voices. Not modern voices. No phones. No radios. Just a recording, maybe. Echoing through the canyon like a memory played back on loop. You follow the sound until it resolves into something stranger, a camp. Or what used to be one. A faded tent collapsed, a rusted fire pit, and next to it a field table left to the elements buried halfway in leaves and time. You brush it off. What you find is a journal soaked but still legible and pinned open to a page under a rock. The title at the top scrawled in faded ink, The Tug-of-War Theory. You sit. The handwriting is uneven, but the ideas inside are razor sharp. The writer, an unnamed paleontologist, posits that Smilodon's iconic sabers may not have been tools for hunting prey at all. They were for each other. According to this theory, the long teeth evolved primarily as combat ornaments used in ritualized low-impact fights between males, or maybe even females, to establish dominance. Much like how deer clash antlers or walruses joust with tusks, these cats may have had a social contract built into their DNA: fight hard, but not to the death. And the sabers, they made the rules visible. You can picture it now. Two Smilodons squaring off in a snowy field, tails low, heads tilted. They snarl and feint. One lashes out not at the belly, not at the throat, but at the face. A warning slice, a theatrical scrape. One fang clips the opponent's lip and draws a red line that says, "I could have ended you," but doesn't. And the other backs off. No bloodbath, no funeral, just hierarchy enforced by precision. Historians still debate whether saber-toothed cats were social enough to engage in non-lethal ritual combat. But this theory has weight. It explains why some fossils show damage to the skull, not the body. Why others show fangs snapped without corresponding predator injuries. Maybe these weren't failed hunts. Maybe they were duels gone wrong. Or worse, duels where someone cheated. You flip the page. There's a sketch now, two Smilodons locked together like fencers, one with a fang buried deep into the other's eye socket. The caption reads, "Was this an accident or escalation?" The writer doesn't say. You tuck the journal away, not because you think it's valuable, but because you know it is. It holds a piece of the mystery that bones alone can't answer. And as you move through the clearing, you notice other clues. Rocks scratched with marks. Not claw marks, but drag lines. Long arcing scores like a saber-tooth running across stone. Practice territory display. Or maybe just an old cat proving it still had something left in the tank. You find another skull, this one smashed at the crown. Not crushed, but dented, as though something heavy hit it straight on. A paw, a rock, another skull, a rock. Another. And both sabers are still intact. Not broken in death, but possibly spared. Which raises the question, what kind of creature evolves a weapon so deadly and chooses not to use it most of the time? The kind that lives in a society, however loose, however strange. Even today, some animals fight with rules. Wolves snarl and posture without drawing blood. Elephants bluff charge. Gorillas beat their chests. Conflict is dangerous. But communication, that's survival. Maybe Smilodon had its own language of the fang. You stop at a cliff's edge, wind tugging at your sleeves. The valley below is full of nothing and everything. Time stacked in layers. Snow like a burial cloth. And down there somewhere, bones locked together in silence. You wonder if we've been wrong all along. If we looked at the saber teeth and assumed violence because violence is easy to imagine. But what if we missed the restraint? What if the sabers weren't the end of a hunt but the start of a conversation? You think of modern fangs, wolves, leopards, tigers. They're all dangerous. but none carry the same theatrical elegance. None look built for spectacle. Smilodon did. Even the shape of the fang, long, narrow, gently curved, suggests design. Not for gnawing, not for dragging. For showing off. For striking, yes, but only when necessary. A sword kept polished, not blood-stained. You sit until the sun dips low enough to cast the whole valley in shadow. Somewhere out there, two saber-toothed cats once locked eyes. One bared its teeth, the other didn't blink. And a moment later, without blood, without scars, dominance was decided. And the sabers, still sharp, still sacred. You dream of kittens. Tiny, stumbling creatures no bigger than your forearm, all fluff and squeaks and claws they haven't grown into yet. And from their upper lips impossibly jut two miniature sabers, just a few centimeters long, curved like baby scythes. They chew nothing, they stab nothing, they just exist there, absurd and adorable, like a joke evolution forgot to retract. You wake laughing softly to yourself, breath fogging in the morning air. The dream clings to you as you hike into lower terrain where the frost loosens its grip and patches of earth break through. It's warmer here. Not warm exactly, just less fatal. That alone makes you suspicious. And sure enough, what you find next is no accident. A dig site, fenced off with cheap wire, half abandoned, but still semi-active. Shovels lie in a tarp forgotten. A few survey flags flap in the breeze. And there under a makeshift lean-to is a plaster, cast in progress, half-buried bones coated in white. You glance around. No one. So you lean in. What you're looking at is a juvenile Smilodon skull. You can tell by the size, the proportions, the awkward growth lines along the jaw. But what grabs your attention is the teeth. All of them. Because this little beast has two sets of sabers. One set long, maybe 4 inches, curving elegantly from the upper jaw. But behind them, tucked into the gum line, are a second pair, shorter, duller, partially reabsorbed. Baby sabers. It's like catching a lion cub mid-molt, except instead of whiskers or fur, it's weapons. Historians still debate the timing of saber-tooth development. Some argue that Smilodon cubs were born nearly fangless, developing their iconic teeth only after they could fend for themselves. Others suggest those daggers began emerging early, long before the cats had any practical use for them. This skull suggests something radical. Both were true. A transitional period where juveniles carried 2 sets of fangs, like having training wheels on a guillotine. You can't stop staring, because this moment in the fossil is like a snapshot of becoming. The baby saber's rounded and almost cute overlap with the newer pair, longer, sharper, still pushing their way into position. It's as if the cat's body hadn't quite decided which weapon to commit to yet. You remember learning about shark teeth, how some species have conveyor belts of replacements. But mammals, we get 2 shots. Baby and adult. That's it. So what does it mean when your second set is an evolutionary hazard? You flip open a nearby field notebook left beneath a rock. The latest entry is dated only a month ago. It's full of excitement over this exact find. Transitional fang development may indicate a longer period of juvenile dependence. Sabers take time. Time means risk. Risk may have driven social behaviors, protection, group care. There it is again. Social behavior. The phrase keeps coming back like an echo. Again and again. You never wanted to believe saber-toothed cats were warm and fuzzy, but now it's getting harder not to. Because if these cubs grew their weapons too early, they were useless. If they grew them too late, they were vulnerable. That in-between period where the kitten has its big, scary teeth but no idea how to use them was a death sentence without help. And help means mothers, or siblings, or something else that lingered nearby to feed and defend them. You start to picture the scene: a litter of sabered kittens romping in the grass, tripping over their own canines. One gets caught in a branch. Another gets smacked in the face by a sibling's saber during play. A third tries to pounce a lizard and ends up face first in a bush. And through it all, a massive adult sits nearby. Watching, waiting, not hunting, not killing, just protecting. It's ridiculous, but only until it isn't. You kneel beside the juvenile skull, eyes locked on those overlapping fangs, and think about how much energy it would take to grow those. How much calcium? How much biological commitment? Evolution doesn't gamble like that without a plan. You remember that some birds grow weird beak protrusions during mating season. Temporary features that drop off after a while. Could saber kittens have had something similar? Display fangs that grew fast then fell away as the real ones came in. Unlikely, but not impossible. Nature's always got a twist. You gently dust off a corner of the jawbone and find what looks like a healed crack. Maybe from play, maybe from clumsiness. It's tiny, but it healed. This cub survived long enough for the adult teeth to come in. You smile. Not all saber stories end in tragedy. You spend the next hour wandering the site, reading more abandoned notes, piecing together a timeline of development. One thing becomes clear: those famous teeth took time. Months, possibly years. And during that time, every cub was a walking liability, which means every cub that reached adulthood did so not just by strength, but by luck. And maybe love. No one really talks about saber-toothed parenting, but maybe it's time we did. You leave the dig site as the light shifts overhead, dappled and golden. And just before you crest the hill, you turn back and whisper to the little skull, "Good job, kid. You made it." You head east now into the wind. It's the kind of direction you choose not because it's right, but because it feels like something is waiting. The trees thin out again, and soon you're walking among rocks the size of cars, cold giants that never moved, only watched. And then tucked between two boulders like a secret, you find the oddest thing yet: a jaw. Just a lower jaw by itself, bone-weathered teeth yellowed, missing the matching upper half. But still it grabs you. It looks wrong. Because this cat, whoever it was, survived something brutal. The molars are worn smooth, the premolars chipped. But the strangest part: the sockets where the upper fangs would have rested. They've been reshaped. Over time, slowly, like water rounding out a groove in stone. As if this jaw had been without sabers for a long time. Long enough for the body to adjust. You turn it gently in your hands and a chill trickles down your back. Because this jaw belonged to a cat that once had sabers and then didn't. Not from youth, not from death, but from living too long. And here's the kicker: the rest of the teeth. They're healthy. This wasn't a cat dying of starvation or infection. This was a cat that kept eating, kept fighting, kept living without its primary weapons. That shouldn't be possible. Historians still debate whether Smilodon fatalis had the tools to survive post-fang. Most insist they didn't. Without their canines, these predators would have been unable to kill efficiently, unable to hold territory, vulnerable. But this jaw disagrees. You sit down, legs crossed, and start comparing notes in your mind. You've now seen at least 3 different examples. One cat with broken sabers and signs of healing. One mummified elder with missing teeth and no trauma. And now this, an ancient jaw that shows long-term adaptation. This is no fluke. You start sketching in the dirt with a twig. A timeline, a theory, a life lived in stages. Stage 1, young. Small sabers. Learning, protected. Stage 2, prime. Full-length fangs. Hunting, dominating. Stage 3, post-prime. Sabers damaged or lost. Shift in behavior. Reliance on group stealth or alternative tactics. And finally, a 4th stage legend. A toothless elder respected not for strength but for survival. You laugh out loud. It sounds ridiculous. And yet it makes sense. You remember reading once that some wolves tolerate old injured packmates. Not just tolerate, revere them. They eat last, sure, but no one chases them off. Because they've seen things, done things, survived things. Maybe Smilodon did that too? Maybe the jaw you're holding didn't just belong to an old cat, it belonged to a respected one. The kind others circled around. The kind that didn't need teeth anymore because it had history. You sit a little straighter and notice something else. Near the jaw is a smaller bone. Not feline, canid maybe, or human. You don't touch it. But you do notice that it's positioned intentionally, almost placed, like an offering. And suddenly, the idea that something buried this cat in this sacred little space doesn't seem so far-fetched. You've seen it in wolves. You've seen it in elephants, mourning, memory, ritual. Maybe we didn't invent that. Maybe we inherited it. You start thinking about all the broken-toothed skeletons found in close proximity. Not just tar pits, but caves, shelters, dens. So many with signs of healing. Not just survival after injury, but survival because of community. Because someone brought them food, kept them warm, kept them safe. There's a phrase anthropologists use: pathological altruism. The idea that even animals sometimes help others when there's no benefit to themselves. That empathy exists outside of language. You wonder how many saber-toothed beasts lived long enough to become burdens, and how many were carried anyway. The sun starts to dip again, and shadows stretch long. You look back down at the jaw in your lap and whisper, "You didn't lose your fangs. You outlived them." And that's something no hunter can take from you. You stand, return the bone gently to its place between the rocks, and brush your hands clean. Then, with one last glance over your shoulder, you walk away. Not because the story's finished, but because you know now that some chapters don't end. They just keep echoing, like a roar that never fades, a fang that never dulls. A legend that doesn't need to bite to be remembered. The land flattens as you travel westward, away from the valleys and trap pits, into open plains that stretch wide and quiet under a bone-pale sky. You're walking on ground where giants once thundered mammoths, ground sloths, herds of camels big enough to block out the sun. And in their shadow, the saber-toothed kings. Except, they're not so far removed from the rulers we know today. You spot a cluster of modern paw prints in the dirt, fresh and sharp, leading toward a stand of trees. Big cat, probably a cougar. And suddenly you're thinking not of Smilodon anymore, but of lions, tigers, panthers, their heirs. And you realize this chapter needs a different mirror. Not one frozen in time, but living. You need to compare the saber-tooth to what came after. You crouch by the prints and remember lions have about 30 teeth. So did Smilodon, but lions have shorter, stronger canines. Compact, durable, designed to crush windpipes and dislocate spines, not delicately thread between ribs. Smilodon's fangs were a gamble. Lion's teeth. A paycheck, functional, reliable, the evolutionary equivalent of giving up jazz to get a day job. But don't mistake that for dullness. Modern big cats are brutal in ways their sabered ancestors couldn't afford to be. Lions bite through bone, tigers drown prey. Leopards drag full-grown carcasses up trees. Their jaws are hammers, not scalpels, and yet they still suffer the same fate: tooth loss. Aging lions in the Serengeti have been documented with broken canines, infected gums, rotting molars. Some die slow, painful deaths. Others, if lucky, are spared by their pride, who share food with them for a little while longer. One famous case involved a lioness who lived nearly 3 years after losing her main biting teeth, supported by her sisters. Sound familiar? Historians still debate whether this caregiving in modern cats is instinctual or an evolutionary echo, but the evidence is mounting. Felines aren't just efficient killers, they're social when they need to be. When the cost of ignoring a wounded elder outweighs the benefit of exile. You trail the cougar tracks into the trees and think maybe Smilodon wasn't so different. And here's where it gets strange. In a wildlife rehab center in Brazil, there's a recorded case of a jaguar losing both its upper canines. The cat adjusted. It began hunting slower prey, used its paws more, relied on ambush. It didn't die, it adapted. So what if losing sabers wasn't the end? What if it was phase 2? You reach a clearing where a scattering of white bones lies under a spruce tree. Not fossilized fresh, deer by the look of it. Probably taken down by the cougar whose prints you followed. You kneel and examine the kill. No signs of crushing, just deep punctures behind the jaw. Clean, efficient, You think of Smilodon again, its fragile sabers, its powerful forelimbs. Some researchers argue that it didn't use its teeth at all to bring prey down just to finish the job. The real work that was in the arms, the grappling, the wrestling. That's why Smilodon's chest and shoulder bones are so robust. More bear than cat, like a living battering ram that used its own mass as the weapon. You stand and mimic the motion swiping an invisible prey animal with imaginary claws. You probably look ridiculous. Good thing the cougar didn't stick around to watch. Still, it helps. Because you realize that what Smilodon lacked in bite force, it made up for with strategy. It wasn't designed to run down prey. It was designed to ambush, trip, pin, and stab. A finisher, not a fighter. And that role, that position in the food web. It's still here. Filled now by big cats, sure, but also by wolves, bears, even humans with rifles. Every predator needs a closer. You look down at the deer bones again and wonder how many generations it took for saber-toothed cats to vanish and lions to rise. The shift wasn't instant. There were probably decades, centuries when both roamed the same grounds. One with blades, one with clubs. Only one won. Because sometimes durability beats drama. You take a slow walk back toward the open plain considering the legacy of teeth not just in Smilodon, but in every predator that came after. We still measure danger by fangs. We still judge strength by bite. We still whisper about the saber-tooth in our museums, our campfire tales, our cartoons. And yet the animals that endure, they often do so with duller tools. Better jaws, slower reflexes, longevity. Funny how nature lets style go extinct but keeps function alive. The wind picks up and for a second you think you hear a growl behind you. You turn. Just trees. Still, your heart pounds a little faster. Not because you think it's a Smilodon, no. You know better than that. But because for a split second you wished it was. The plains vanish behind you as you climb again up through a narrow pass filled with leaning stones, and the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. And it's here, oddly enough, that the myths begin to rise. Not the kind from paleontology papers. The older ones. The ones told around fires when the bones were still fresh. You reach a weathered outcrop where someone sometime carved shapes into the rock circles, claws, elongated fangs. And in the center a cat, stylized yes, but unmistakably saber-toothed. It crouches over a human stick figure, not biting, not killing. Just looming, watching. Welcome to the age of stories. You sit down on a flat slab watching the clouds crawl over the hills like tired animals. And you think about how many generations stared into the same sky and tried to explain the bones beneath their feet. Smilodon wasn't just a predator to them. It was a presence, one that outlived its roar. Archaeologists have found stone tools near saber-tooth skeletons. Not marks of battle, no spearheads jammed in ribs, but arrangements, alignments, as if the bodies were intentionally placed, as if they were buried. Historians still debate whether early humans ever revered the saber-tooth not as a god, but as something close, a spirit, a lesson, maybe even a warning. And it's not hard to imagine why. You picture it, a tribe finds a half-buried skull, teeth still gleaming bones, sprawled in frozen theater. The cat is long dead, but the image lives. A creature that didn't just kill, but looked like it could kill the sky itself. So they make it sacred. They carve it on their shelters, paint it with ochre, pass down stories, the cat who lost its teeth, the one with the bloody smile, the beast who waited. One myth from the western mountains tells of a saber-tooth who grew so old it lost both fangs. But the people did not fear it. They fed it, honored it. And when it finally lay down and died, they say its breath became the wind that still guards their valley. You can't cite that in a paper, but it feels more true than anything on a fossil card. You rise and walk the edge of the ridge where bones lie cracked open by frost. Most are prey deer, camel, something equine. But one rib bears a strange gouge, not from fangs, from fire. Blackened at one end, split at the other. A cooking mark. Humans were here, And they likely watched saber-tooths vanish just as we now watch lions in dwindling numbers. And maybe, just maybe, they tried to understand it. You crouch beside the bones and think about memory. Not yours, ours, humanity's. The kind we tuck into stories because we don't have files or databases out here. We have symbols, patterns, teeth. The saber-tooth has become a symbol of extinction. But long before that, it was a symbol of fear, of majesty, of limits. It wasn't just that thing with the fangs. It was the thing you didn't challenge, the thing you only survived by respecting. And that respect, it left fingerprints, petroglyphs, beads shaped like fangs, ritual claws carved from antler, stories passed down about giant cats with teeth too long to close their mouths, but hearts wise enough to spare the weak. You find another carving farther down the slope, this one newer, clearly modern. Someone has etched a human skull beside a feline one, their foreheads touching. And below it, a single word, witness. That hits harder than expected, because that's what you are out here. Not a scientist, not a storyteller. A witness. To the bones, to the myths, to the beasts that once ruled without needing words. You think about the jaw you found earlier, reshaped by age. The mummified cat who died gently. The cub who grew up carrying too many fangs. They weren't just predators, they were lives. And the people who lived beside them, they didn't forget. They made sure no one could. You look at your reflection in a nearby puddle warped by ripples and wind, and you think, we're not so different. We carry our legends too. We tell stories about things with teeth not because we want to be afraid, but because we want to remember what it means to survive. You walk on, and behind you in stone and dust and memory, the saber-tooth watches, not to kill, just to be seen. There's a wind tonight that doesn't care about your jacket. It slices through the seams, wraps around your ribs, and hums something ancient in your ear. You've been walking for hours back into the basin where this all began, where the first saber-teeth called out from the frost and dared you to follow. And now you're back. Except everything's changed. You move slower. You notice more. Each curve in the ice feels like the line of a jawbone. Each crack in the stone reminds you of a fang that didn't make it. You pause beside a ridge where someone's propped up a simple wooden cross. No name, just a shape. And stuck into the ground at its base, a tooth. A real one. Not fossil, not replica, yellowed, fractured, left behind. And it hits you in that small, wordless way, the kind that creeps up behind your thoughts and taps gently on the shoulder. The saber-tooth didn't vanish in a roar. It faded. One death at a time. One cracked fang, one missed kill. One frozen night too many. And yet, some part of it never left. You glance around the ridge. There are bones here, scattered and half buried in the snow like loose punctuation in an unfinished sentence. A rib, a vertebra, a scapula worn smooth by wind, and then near the base of an old pine, a skull. Perfect, complete. Except no teeth. Not broken, just gone. You crouch, almost reverent now, and run your hand along the upper jaw. You half expect to feel the sockets whisper something back, but they don't. They're just empty, waiting. Historians still debate whether the teeth outlive the beast. In most cases, yes, saber fangs fossilize beautifully. They're often the only thing people recognize. But here's the irony. Those teeth that define the animal, they were the first to fail. When the prey ran dry, when the bones became harder, when age crept into the jaw hinge and didn't let go, those teeth were the first to crack, to shatter, to fall. And still, the cats carried on. You find another bone nearby mandible this time. And scratched into it not by nature but by hands is a symbol. A spiral. Maybe a signature, maybe a mark. Or maybe a message. Because here's what you've been realizing, the saber-tooth isn't just bones in the ground. It's an idea, a shape, a question we haven't stopped asking since the Ice Age ended. What does it mean to lose the thing that made you powerful and keep going? You sit beside the skull and think about your own teeth. your own years. All the tools you once thought made you invincible, maybe they'll break, maybe they already have. That's not the end. The saber-tooth didn't need its fangs to be remembered. It needed the journey. The part where it stumbled, limped, adapted. The part where it learned that claws and patience and memory could take the place of bone. You look up at the sky, no stars, just a thick gray ceiling glowing faintly from some unseen moon. And you realize something else. Those teeth we find in museums, the ones under glass, the ones we call artifacts, they're not decorations. They're questions. And the answer isn't in a lab. It's out here in the frost and the dirt and the wind that sings like an old beast breathing its last. You brush snow off the skull one last time, and as you turn to leave you whisper, they remember you. Because we do. In our books, in our myths, in our own aging hands. The saber-tooth didn't survive because it was invincible. It survived because even without its fangs, it tried. The trail leads nowhere now. You've left behind the tar, the dig sites, the rock carvings and legends scratched into bones. What's ahead is just tundra. Empty, cold, eternal. The kind of place where footprints vanish minutes after they're made, as if the earth itself prefers not to remember too much at once. And yet you keep walking, because there's one more story left to find. You crest a gentle slope and see it faint in the distance, just barely outlined against the dusk. A shallow depression in the snow, wide and oval-shaped, surrounded by a loose ring of scattered rocks. A den, maybe, or a grave. You approach slowly. In the center lies a skeleton, fully exposed as if the snow had been peeled away just for you. Its curled inward, tail-tucked forelimbs crossed over the chest like arms. The bones are old but not shattered. No signs of violence, just stillness. And the head, tilted to one side, mouth open, both saber teeth still in place, one cracked nearly at the base, the other worn dull. This was the last one. You don't know that, of course. You can't prove it. But in this moment, standing under a sky heavy with the weight of forgotten ages, you believe it. This Smilodon didn't die in battle, didn't vanish in tar or blizzard. It rested. You kneel beside the bones not as an intruder but as a guest. Your breath clouds in the still air. You can see every curve of the ribs, every groove in the skull. The fangs are thinner than you expected, less like weapons, now more like feathers left behind by something larger than life. Historians still debate whether extinction is a slow bleed or a sudden stop, but here it feels like a whisper, a sigh, a last breath drawn not in fear but in peace. And somehow that matters more than anything else. Because you can imagine it now. This old cat alone, yes, but not forgotten. Maybe once part of a pride. Maybe once feared. Maybe once helped another make it through one more impossible winter. Maybe once held territory so vast birds followed its shadow just to stay warm. And in the end, it lay down. Its teeth cracked, its eyes closed, and the world moved on. You look up at the darkening sky and you wonder if thousands of years from now, someone will stand where you are. Wonder what we left behind. What bones, what myths, what questions still linger. Maybe they'll find our teeth, and maybe they'll ask the same thing you did. What happens when the thing that made us strong breaks? You brush the snow gently from the saber's edge one last time. It no longer gleams. It no longer cuts. But it remembers. And that's enough. The light fades completely now. The wind dies with it. And for a moment in the deep hush of the ages, you swear you hear it, one last breath rattling through broken teeth. Then silence. In the frozen silence of forgotten ages, you walked with a question. Do saber-toothed beasts lose their teeth in old age? What you found was far more than an answer. You uncovered bones broken not in battle but in time. You saw sabers worn to nubs, sockets empty, and healed jaws reshaped by life after fangs. You met cubs growing into their teeth and elders outliving them. You witnessed a creature too often framed as a monster, revealed instead as something more fragile, more complicated, more human. Smilodon fatalis didn't simply hunt. It adapted. It stumbled. It aged. And when its weapons failed, it found other ways to go on through caution memory and perhaps even the help of others. You traced its arc from ambush predator to reluctant elder, from myth to fossil to legend again. You saw how early humans remembered it in stories, how its image endured long after its bones were buried. In the end, you didn't just find the tooth. You found the truth it carried. That survival is not just about strength, but about persistence. That identity doesn't end when the sharpest parts of you are gone. And that the last saber didn't need to roar to be remembered. It only needed to rest.